Hello everybody and welcome to GT Sport where, as I'm sure most of you know, the Toyota GR Yaris has just been added to the game in the 1.62 update, and it's quite a unique and cool little car, but it has no direct rivals. It still needs a good testing though, so I thought, let's just put it up against, well, everything. Let's meet the contenders. So then, starting off on the left hand side, we have a group of modern Japanese performance cars and arguably the two most direct competitors to the GR Yaris, the Subaru WRX STI and the Mitsubishi Evo 10. Of course, the Evo and the WRX STI are synonymous with four-wheel drive rally bred specials, so they had to be here. They're both a decent chunk of power up on the Yaris, but they're also a lot heavier, so we'll see how those two compare to each other as well as the rest of the field. And our final car for this group is the Honda Civic Type R, the only front-wheel drive car in this field, but it's just as powerful as the Evo and WRX STI, but it's lighter, so I still think it stands a good chance in some of these challenges. Let's see how it does. Moving over then to our European vehicles, we find the other hot hatch, the four-wheel drive Mercedes A45 AMG. The most powerful car here, but also the heaviest. It's definitely going to be good in a straight line, but I've driven it before a bit on this game, and I remember not liking it very much, so we'll see what it's like in the corners. Regardless of that though, will there be any arguing with an almost 100 horsepower advantage over the Yaris? Speaking of power though, we have the Alpine A110, the only car here to have less power than the Yaris, but also the only car to be lighter, weighing in at just 1100 kilograms. It has a big advantage in the weight regard, so we'll see if it can make up for the power deficit. And for our final European car, we have the Audi TTS, which is a lovely car to drive. It has the four-wheel drive traction advantage, so I think this may be the car to watch out for in this battle. So, to round out our group, we have a trio of JDM legends. The Toyota Supra is going to give us some inter-brand competition. I was going to use the new Mark V GR Supra, but I think that would just be a bit unfair. It would wipe the floor with everything. But we have the legendary Mark IV, as well as the Honda NSX Type R and the Mazda RX-7 FD. Now, both of those two cars are very similar in terms of both power and weight to the GR Yaris, so it'll be interesting to see how these older rear-wheel drive cars fare against the new hot hatch. So that's our 10 car group, and now it's time to find out which is the best, because over this next series of challenges there's going to be nowhere to hide. And we're going to kick off with a good old-fashioned quarter-mile drag race. So of course that means heading to Route X, but we still encounter a problem because you're not going to fit 10 cars on the track at once, and I don't have that many friends. So it's going to be a split screen job, but 10 cars on the screen is still going to be a bit too much to process, so we're going to start off by eliminating the bottom four, running through those quickly before we move on to the fastest cars of the group. Okay then, to take a look in a bit more detail, unsurprisingly the Civic did come home in last, really hampered by its front-wheel drive traction disadvantage. It was over half a second slower to 60 than anything else, and by the quarter mile's end, it just couldn't make any time up. More surprising though is the Supra coming in only one place in front. It's the second most powerful car here, but it didn't get a very good launch, and after that, its weight held it back a bit. Following that, in 8th place, we have the Mazda RX-7. Less of a surprise, I wasn't really expecting this to be the RX-7's forte, so it did okay. And our final car of this little group is the Evo 10. Hampered by its gear ratios, had to go to 3rd before 60 miles an hour, and it was already running out of puff by the quarter mile's end. Okay, so 6th place goes to the Honda NSX. Not bad for a car on the lower end of the power spectrum, but its lightweight must have helped it out here. Moving into the top half, and the Subaru WRX STI is there. Four-wheel drive traction, of course, like the Evo, but better geared, means it did a bit better than the Evo despite them being practically identical in terms of power and weight. Fourth place goes to the Alpine A110, which was a bit of a shocker. Considering its power deficit, I wasn't expecting it to do this well, but it shot off the line. It's the fastest of the rear-wheel drive cars, but I suppose there's no arguing in a straight line sometimes with lightweight and close ratios, at least over a short distance like this one. Now moving on to our podium spot, and the first one is taken by the wonderful pink GR Yaris. Of course, being four-wheel drive, the launch was never going to be an issue, but it continued to pull strong over the course of the quarter mile. So second place goes to the Mercedes A45 AMG. Of course, the most powerful car here. Wasn't surprising that it was going to do well. I was banking on it taking the top spot, but not quite, because the Audi TTS stole that instead. Obviously it has four-wheel drive, and while it's a bit down on power compared to the Mercedes, its lightweight meant it was a bit quicker accelerating. So there we have it. The Audi takes the top spot in a straight line. Or does it? Because let's see if it can hold on to that crown and see if the positions change when we stretch the distance to a kilometre. Straight line stuff now out of the way, with the Audi winning by the narrowest of margins, we're going to head to the track. And if you've watched my tuning showdowns with like the best N100 and the best N200 car videos, we're going to be using the same three circuits to really test every aspect of the cars. And we're going to start off going from one extreme, from the high speed straight line stuff, to the tight and technical Tsukuba circuit. Just like the straight line challenges previously, Tsukuba also threw up some surprises and disappointments. Speaking of which, the Mercedes A45, very strong in the straight lines, but it sucked around Tsukuba. Now, I'll be honest, it's not far off the pace of the other cars when you see the times in a minute, but it just felt awful to drive and really clumsy and awkward. There was a lot of pitch on the braking, meaning the back was coming up and making it really unstable and kind of sliding into a lot of corners and scrubbing off speed. And then when you got on power to get out of them, the four-wheel drive system felt very front biased, and you just get understeer. But it was strong in a straight line, traction was obviously there, so But as far as the other four-wheel drive goes, they pretty much all drove as you'd expect them to. The Evo and WRX STI were practically inseparable, although maybe the Evo felt just a little bit sharper. The Audi felt very quick as well, completely unflappable traction, point, squirt, and off you go. It could definitely fall into understeer if you got on the power too early and grabbed it a bit too hard by the scruff of the neck, but overall, yeah, it was very good. And so was the GR Yaris, but very different handling, of course, to the other four-wheel drive cars. It felt a lot more rear biased, and with that short wheelbase, it was a bit of a hooligan, but an absolute riot to drive. The RX-7 was also very good and so much better without balance of performance, as we've been driving it around Tsukuba for this week's daily race. It definitely felt at home on the track like this. Traction was pretty good, and so was the corner speed. It felt like one of the best cars around here, and definitely better than the NSX, which was a slight disappointment. It wasn't bad at all, but it was a fair bit more understeer than I was expecting. That could be worked around though. As for the other Honda, the Civic Type R, it was pretty good, very predictable to drive. You had to manage the power a bit, obviously being front wheel drive out of the corners, but once you did that, it was pretty good, and it felt good even though it wasn't the fastest around here. The same could be said of the Supra. Very predictable drive, very satisfying, although a bit lacking in corner speed, but very easy to get in a rhythm and just enjoy driving the car. It also sounded pretty good. Which leaves only one car left to talk about, the Alpine A110, a car that I was expecting to be pretty strong around Tsukuba. But in the end, it turned out to be the biggest disappointment in the group. The pace wasn't bad, but it was just very nervous and a very dodgy experience to drive. There was quite a bit of understeer on the way into the corners, and then the back would go pretty suddenly, and sometimes when you'd go to correct, it would be easy to overcorrect, and it would just spit you back the other way again. I was expecting it to be a bit more delicate and a bit easier to drive, but you had to be very, very careful if you wanted to get pace out of the A110. I don't ever remember it being like that to drive before, but that was the case today. So from the low-speed Tsukuba, we move to our high-speed track in the form of the first two sectors of the Nordschleife, which combine pretty much all the nasty facets of the whole 13-mile circuit into about a minute and a half. So let's see how the cars do here. This is where our three rally-bred cars started to struggle a bit because they were lacking in that ultimate top-end speed. Approaching Schradenkreuz, they were 5 to 10 miles an hour down on the rest of the field, although they were pretty good around the corners. Maybe the Evo and WRX were lacking in corner speed a bit, and the Yaris, you had to be quite careful because of the short wheelbase through the quick direction changes to keep the rear in check, but they didn't do too badly or didn't feel too bad. Speaking of which, the A110 was a bit better behaved inexplicably. I was expecting it to be worse here, but maybe I was just more used to the car or being more trepidatious, but it seemed to behave a bit better here, and Mercedes didn't feel as awful. In a weird turn of events, maybe the Nürburgring wasn't bringing out the worst in the A45 like Tsukuba did. The TT still felt pretty damn good, although it did pitch a bit, so you had to be wary of that, but overall, pretty good. The RX-7 felt great once you learned to manage the oversteer, which could crop up from time to time. That was pretty fast. And the NSX, the understeer we had at Tsukuba, wasn't so much of a problem. And approaching Schradenkreuz on the fastest section of the track, it was the fastest car on that straight. The Supra also felt stronger. There was a bit of understeer and the corner speed still wasn't quite there, but again, easy to drive, and having a more open circuit did suit the car more. And the same can certainly be said of the Civic Type R. Without those low-speed traction limitations, it felt a lot better. So for our third and final track, we move to Laguna Seca, which is kind of a culmination of all the challenges so far, and is going to be our main test track for these showdowns. And by this point, the cars had no secrets or surprises left. The ones that felt good continued to feel good. The Supra was solid, the Yaris was agile and a bit of a hooligan, but still very quick. The Audi was quick, so was the RX-7, a very precise car. The A110 was at its worst. It tried to spit me off like 3 or 4 times into the gravel. But when I finally did get a lap in, it wasn't too bad. Mercedes continued to be a bit miserable. but that was kind of to be expected. The Evo and WRX STI were both pretty consistent as they had been over the past two circuits. Again, not much of a surprise, but it was good to finally just set some solid laps and be able to focus on my driving rather than taming the car as such, and that can also be said of the Civic Type R. Once you learned that you only needed to use 2 gears for the entire circuit, it was good and you could really focus on your lines instead of worrying about what the car's going to do if you step a little bit out of line. And for the other Honda, the NSX, it was good, but the understeer was kind of exacerbated around here, although overall, not too bad. So there we have it, that's the GR Yaris versus the competition, and even if it didn't win in every challenge, subjectively the Yaris is my favourite car. It's so much fun to drive, although there are other strong cars here. Obviously, objectively the Audi is probably the winner with how strongly it finished, but for the objective winner, I'm letting you decide how we decided, because I didn't know whether to use total time or maybe a points-based system to determine our winner. So I'm gonna let you decide that. Let me know in the comments. And once that's decided upon, I will make a community post announcing the winner. And also let me know your personal favourite car too. But that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for watching, and have a good day.